Big day today at the Supreme Court. They gave their ruling on the latest attempt to dismantle Obamacare, called King versus Burwell. So here's what the case boils down to. This one sentence in the Affordable Care Act. It says, quote, "An exchange established by the state." So the idea from the opponents is that Obamacare wasn't written with a healthcare exchange established by the country. So the federal exchange has to be dismantled because the law doesn't allow for a federal exchange, and all it allows for is state exchanges. So if Republican states decided not to set up an exchange at the state level, they say, well, you can't create it at the national level because the law doesn't allow for that. And, of course, if they rule on the side of the challengers, almost all of the red states lose their subsidies through the federal exchange, and that means prices for insurance policies go way up, people can't afford them, and then Obamacare would crumble slowly around it. So how did the Supreme Court rule? They sided with Obamacare. They upheld it. They did the right thing. Now, John Roberts was the key vote. He was the key vote the last time around when he saved Obamacare. He is a conservative justice, but on this issue, he couldn't bring himself to twist himself into all these into an intellectual pretzel. He couldn't do the mental gymnastics enough, so he ended up doing the right thing and siding with Obamacare. Here's what he said in the majority opinion, quote, "In a democracy, the power to make the law rests with those chosen by the people. Our role is more confined to say what the law is, like in Marbury versus Madison. That is easier in some cases than in others. But in every case, we must respect the role of the legislature and take care not to undo what it has done. A fair reading of legislation demands a fair understanding of the legislative plan. Congress passed the Affordable Care Act to improve health insurance markets, not to destroy them. If at all possible, we must interpret the act in a way that is consistent with the former and avoids the latter. Section 36B can fairly be read consistent with what we see as Congress's plan, and that is the reading we adopt." So their argument is basically, well, the word state can be interpreted as a literal state, like you pick a state, New York, Kentucky, whatever, or it can be interpreted as a nation state, aka a country, like the United States of America. So why wouldn't the federal government be able to create an exchange if the word state is interpreted in a broader way? They say, well, it can. And also, the rest of the law seems to imply that a federal exchange is fine. So it seems like it would have to be a purposeful misreading of the law to say otherwise, because the rest of the exchange goes on as if it's like understood and everybody knows that there could be a federal exchange. But naturally, Scalia wrote a scathing dissent, and he said, quote, "We might as well call it SCOTUS care." So instead of Obamacare, it's like SCOTUS care now because we like upheld it twice, and that's fucked up. We shouldn't have done that. Yeah, I find Antonin Scalia a clownish human being, because he wears the cape of principle and parades around like, oh, yeah, no, I always make decisions based off the Constitution. I never let my personal politics get involved. And then he always lets his personal politics get involved. Every decision he's ever made, his personal politics have gotten involved. There's a great article we covered a few months ago which showed a clear example of him contradicting himself on the issue of Obamacare. There was one time when it was convenient to his argument to say, well, if we strike down a certain part of Obamacare, Congress will fix it. So he said that. And then there was a different time where he said, this Congress can't function properly. How can we expect them to? So again, it's just whatever suits his argument, he'd say. We've covered the states' rights hypocrisy before. He always screams about how states are sovereign, they can do what they want. So for example, he did that when Arizona wanted to enforce their own border policy. He basically said, they're not a sovereign state if you don't let them do that. So in that case, it's states' rights. Then when they hear a case about marijuana, and certain states either legalizing it or decriminalizing it or using it for medicinal purposes, what does he say? Oh, no, the supremacy clause of the Constitution says the federal government overrides the state government. Therefore, take your state's rights for a hike. The federal government has the last say because they're on my side. So the guy's the biggest hypocrite in the world. He's a comical human being. But here's what pisses me off about this case. The Supreme Court, in one of the previous Obamacare cases, slapped down the provision of Obamacare that mandated that the states create their own exchanges. Okay, so part of the original law was every state needs to create its own exchange. So the federal government wasn't necessarily going to step up and do it. It was going to be, okay, you guys want states' rights? Okay, states' rights. You guys want to take care of stuff at a state level? Okay, great. So you guys create your exchange, and that'll be part of the law. Well, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. So it's optional. So now some red states decided, well, we're just not going to set up our own exchange. 34 of them, to be exact. 34 states refused to make an exchange. A lot of the most liberal states, of course, created their own exchange. So that made it so that the federal government essentially had to step up and create the federal exchange in order for the law to function. And then Scalia turns around and says, you can't do that because that's not the original intent of the law. Well, yeah, because you changed the law. You block the original intent of the law. So then when they step up and they say, okay, I guess we got to fix it this way, you go, oh, you can't do that. That's not the original intent. But when they did the original intent, you said, no, that I don't like that, so no. So then it's a lose-lose. You see, all he's trying to do is torpedo it. That's what it comes down to. He doesn't give a fuck about the law itself. He cares about his own political opinions, so he'll twist himself into a pretzel to say, it's unconstitutional because I say it's unconstitutional. I don't have a good argument for it, but I'll just say it, and hopefully I can convince a bunch of the other idiots on the court. Well, thankfully, he didn't convince John Roberts, and John Roberts did the right thing yet again. So at least for now, Obamacare looks as if it's here to stay, which is fantastic because it's certainly better than the healthcare system we had beforehand. But of course, I have to end the segment here on a downer and say, we're not done with healthcare reform yet. You know, it's an incremental change. It's a step in the right direction to have Obamacare over nothing care. But we know what the end goal is. We know what we should have. We should have a single-payer system. We should have Medicare for all. And we shouldn't stop fighting until we get there.